How do you respond to emotional pain or personal loss? How should we respond to things that upset or hurt us? And when we're feeling sad, heartbroken, or depressed, what can we do to help ourselves feel better? We're going to look at Jesus' response to a personal tragedy, the death of a family member. The way he responds to this loss is both very human, but also very enlightening. His actions give us insight into our own self-care and how we act toward others in view of suffering. In Matthew 14, he begins by telling us about Herod the Tetrarch, the ruler over the region known as Galilee where Jesus lived. Now, Herod had arrested John the Baptist for speaking out against his marriage to his brother's wife, Herodias. Later on, Herod was having a birthday party for himself and had all his nobles there, and he had his niece, stepdaughter, whatever. It's creepy and gross either way. His wife's daughter come and dance for him and all of his rich friends. Herod liked her dancing so much that he made the kind of dumb vow that only kings make. I'll give you whatever you want, up to half my kingdom. And the girl goes to her mother and asks her what she should ask for. And her mother says, John the Baptist's head. So she does. And Herod calls his executioner, and John is killed. And it's this bitter, sad ending to this incredibly bold servant of God. The whole thing reads like this dark inversion of Esther, chapters 5 through 8. But in Matthew 14, starting in verse 13, it says that, now Jesus, when he had heard this, he withdrew from there in a boat to a desolate place by himself. Can you imagine the pain and grief you would feel if someone you cared about was not only put in prison unjustly, but then brutally executed for no good reason? It's no wonder he needed some time alone. Sometimes when we are facing difficulties, it's healthy for us to get outside and have some time alone. However, the story doesn't stop here. Despite wanting to be alone in the wilderness for a while, Jesus' followers still needed him. So they followed him out into this desolate place. Those people literally followed Jesus into the middle of nowhere, and on top of that, they brought their sick people with them. So, in the middle of this personal pain and loss that Jesus is feeling, he does something really beautiful. He looks at the crowd and sees all those sick and hurting people, and he feels compassion for them. Sometimes when we're hurting, our own pain can feel like the most important thing. Or we might lack sympathy for others because we feel like our situation is worse, and therefore it's more important or more real. But Jesus steps out of his boat and begins to heal people. And even though he has his own problems, he chooses to do good things for others. And as if healing the sick people weren't enough, he recognizes the physical needs of the massive crowd of people. They're going to need food. And despite the disciples telling Jesus that he needs to disperse the crowd so that they might go find food for themselves, Jesus tells them that they should give them something to eat. And despite their pathetic amount of food, 5 loaves and 2 fish, the disciples hand it over to Jesus and he blesses it, and everyone shares and they eat. And miraculously, that tiny amount of food fed over 5,000 people. When you're hurting and struggling, what do you do? The really interesting part of this story is that when faced with pain, sadness, grief, and loss, Jesus does 2 things. He takes some time to be alone, but as soon as the opportunity arises for him to do good for others, he takes it. He chooses to focus on helping others rather than his own happiness. There's an amazing truth in this. 2 things are proven to be linked to happiness and greater levels of life satisfaction, and they're spending time outside and doing things for others, specifically being charitable and volunteering to help others in need. And here's the great part. If we want to be happy, and I'm assuming that you do, there are few better ways to ensure our own emotional well-being, happiness, and life satisfaction than doing good for others. And we can do this all the time. So, what are you going to do? Maybe you could spend some time working with someone else who's struggling with a class, a sport, or in some other activity that you're blessed to be good at. Maybe it could be making something like a card or even a meal for someone who's having a hard time. Maybe you could do a task or a chore for someone to make their day or week a little easier. Maybe it could be volunteering to serve at your school, church, or a local charity. Simply put, treat others the way you want to be treated. Ask yourself how much good you could do this week if you dedicated yourself to the well-being of others. All you need is to decide and go do it.